I never imagined that at 39, I would feel so distant from the man I once thought I would grow old with. My husband, Richard, had once been my best friend, my confidant. But over the years, our connection had faded into something transactional, a series of obligations rather than a bond of love and understanding. I truly did. I made sure dinner was always prepared, the house always in order. I listened to his worries, supported his career, and met his needs, even when my own were left unspoken. But no matter how much I gave, I felt unseen, unheard, unloved. Richard was a good provider, but a husband, a partner. Somewhere along the way, he had stopped being that to me. The only warmth in my life now came from my son, Ethan. At 18, he was becoming his own man, yet he always found time for me. Where his father was distant, Ethan was present. Where Richard spoke in short, clipped sentences, Ethan was full of life, laughter, and warmth. He noticed when I was tired. He noticed when my eyes were weighed down by a sadness I didn't dare name. "Mom, you okay?" he asked one evening as I stood at the sink, washing dishes. I turned to see him leaning against the counter, arms crossed over his broadening chest, his expression full of concern. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I said, forcing a smile. He didn't believe me. He never did when I lied. "You sure? You've been quiet lately." I wanted to tell him everything. How lonely I felt, how the walls of my marriage had become a prison of silence. But he was my son. I wasn't supposed to burden him with such things. So, I only smiled again and reached up to brush a strand of hair from his forehead. "Really, Ethan? I'm fine." He held my gaze for a moment longer before nodding. But as he turned to leave, he hesitated. "You know you can talk to me, right?" he said softly. My heart ached at the sincerity in his voice. "I know," I whispered. And I did. Ethan had always been different from his father. Where Richard buried himself in work and rarely looked up from his laptop during dinner, Ethan made a point to sit with me, to ask me about my day. We'd cook together sometimes, something Richard had never done. One night, after Richard had left for yet another late business dinner, Ethan found me in the kitchen, absently stirring a pot of soup. "Let me help," he said, grabbing a knife and a bell pepper. "You don't have to," I said, watching him begin to chop with practiced ease. "I want to." And that was the difference. We worked side by side, the soft hum of music playing from my old radio filling the kitchen. I found myself laughing as Ethan made a show of dramatically flipping a pancake, nearly dropping it in the process. It was effortless, easy, something I hadn't felt in years. "You should laugh more, Mom," he said as we sat down to eat. I sighed, stirring my soup. "It's not always that easy." "Maybe it should be," he said simply. "Maybe you deserve to be happy." I looked up at him then, truly looked at him. His eyes, so much like mine, held a quiet intensity, a deep understanding I hadn't expected. "I used to be," I admitted softly. "You still can be," he said. And for the first time in years I believed it. It had been years since I had done something spontaneous, something just for myself. But Ethan had a way of pulling me out of my routine, of making me forget the weight I carried on my shoulders. One evening after dinner, he leaned against the counter with that mischievous glint in his eyes, the one that told me he had a plan. "Mom, let's go out." I blinked, confused. "Out where?" "Anywhere. Let's just do something fun. No schedules, no responsibilities, just you and me." I hesitated. It had been so long since I'd done something like that. Richard never invited me out anymore, and over time I had convinced myself that staying home, keeping everything in order, was what I was supposed to do. But Ethan was looking at me with that hopeful smile, and suddenly, the idea didn't seem so crazy. "Okay," I said, surprising myself. "Where are we going?" "You'll see." We stepped out into the cool night air, the city buzzing with life around us. The streets were alive with people, laughter spilling out of cafes and bars. For the first time in years I felt light. Ethan walked beside me, his hands in his pockets, his usual confidence evident in every step. "You look great, Mom," he said, nudging me playfully. I glanced down at my simple outfit, jeans, a fitted blouse, and my favorite heels. Nothing special, but from the way he said it I felt beautiful. "Flatterer," I teased. "Just telling the truth," he said with a grin. We wandered through the streets, talking about everything and nothing. It was easy with him. He made me laugh, really laugh. It had been so long since I felt that carefree. Then suddenly, He stopped in front of a building with flashing lights and a rhythmic beat thumping from inside. "A club?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yep," he said. "Come on." I shook my head, laughing. "Ethan, I am not dressed for a club." "You look perfect," he said without hesitation, grabbing my hand. "Besides, I won't take no for an answer." Before I could protest, he pulled me inside. The music enveloped me the moment we stepped in, a deep, pulsing beat that vibrated through the air. The lights were dim, colored strobes flashing across the dance floor where people swayed and moved in rhythm. Ethan led me to the bar first. "2 cocktails," he told the bartender, flashing a confident smile. I shook my head with a smirk. "And how do you know what cocktails to order?" "I've been out once or twice, Mom," he teased. "Besides, you need to loosen up." The bartender placed 2 colorful drinks in front of us. I took a hesitant sip, the sweet and citrusy taste refreshing. "Not bad," I admitted. Ethan clinked his glass against mine. "To having fun for once." I laughed, shaking my head. "To having fun," I agreed. We stood by the bar for a while, sipping our drinks, people watching, and making light-hearted jokes about the over-the-top dancers. Ethan was effortlessly charming. His humor infectious. "Come on," he said suddenly, holding out his hand. "Where?" "To dance." I hesitated. "Ethan, I haven't danced in." "Exactly," he interrupted, grabbing my hand. "That's why you need to." I let out an exasperated sigh but allowed him to pull me onto the dance floor. First I was stiff, uncertain. But Ethan moved with ease, effortlessly blending into the rhythm of the music. His energy contagious. "Relax," he said, spinning me around playfully. I laughed, shaking my head at his antics. But as the music picked up, I found myself letting go. The beat pulsed through my veins, and for the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about responsibilities, about schedules, about the things weighing me down. I was just present. Ethan twirled me again, making me laugh. "There she is," he said. "Who?" I asked breathlessly. "The fun version of you." I smiled, realizing he was right. I had buried her under years of routine and loneliness. But tonight she was here, dancing, laughing, alive. By the time we left the club, I was breathless and exhilarated. The night air was cool against my flushed skin, and I leaned against a nearby wall, catching my breath. Ethan looked at me with a proud smirk. "Told you it would be fun." I rolled my eyes. "Fine, you were right." He grinned. "You needed that, Mom." I sighed, looking up at the city lights. "Yeah," I admitted softly. "I really did." As we walked home, I felt different, lighter, freer. Ethan had reminded me of something I had forgotten. I wasn't just a wife or a mother. I was a woman who deserved to live, to laugh, to dance. And for that I was grateful. After that night out, something inside me had changed. It was subtle at first, just small moments where I caught myself smiling for no reason or feeling lighter, more at ease. The weight of my monotonous life didn't feel as heavy anymore. I had spent so long blending into the background of my own existence that I had forgotten what it felt like to simply live. And Ethan had reminded me. But it wasn't just me who had changed. He had too. At first I thought I was imagining it. The little things. His glances lingering a second longer, the way his voice softened when he spoke to me, the casual touches that felt a bit more intentional. But as the days passed, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Ethan was different. He was still his usual self, charming, thoughtful, full of warmth, but there was a quiet intensity in him now, something unspoken that I couldn't quite put my finger on. One afternoon, as I sat on the couch reading, I felt his presence before I even saw him. "You've been smiling a lot more lately," he said, dropping onto the couch beside me. I looked up from my book, raising an eyebrow. "That's a bad thing." "No," he shook his head, his lips curling into a smirk. "I like it. You seem happier." I closed the book, setting it aside. "I think I am." Ethan leaned back, stretching his arms across the back of the couch. "Good. You deserve to be." There was again that look. Something unreadable in his eyes. Something deeper than simple affection. It made my heart skip, just for a second. I pushed the feeling aside. "You've changed too, you know," I said, tilting my head. "You've been different since that night." He looked amused. "Different how?" I hesitated. "I don't know. Just different. Or, I don't know. Attentive." Ethan let out a soft chuckle. "Mom, I've always been attentive." And he had. But this was different. After that night at the club, we started spending more time together. It wasn't intentional, it just happened naturally. Cooking dinner together became a habit. Evening walks turned into late-night talks on the balcony. Movies on the couch stretched into long conversations, sometimes until the early hours of the morning. I didn't realize how much I had been missing companionship until Ethan started filling that space in my life. Richard was still the same. He barely noticed the changes in me, too absorbed in his work and routines to care. But I had stopped waiting for him to. One evening, as Ethan and I washed dishes together, he suddenly flicked a handful of water at me. Gasped, stepping back. "Oh, you did not just." Before I could finish, he did it again, grinning. I grabbed the sink sprayer and turned it on him, making him yelp. "Mom," he laughed, shielding himself. "That's cheating. All's fair in war," I shot back, giggling. We ended up in a full-blown water fight in the kitchen, laughing until we were both breathless. When we finally stopped, I was leaning against the counter trying to catch my breath, while Ethan stood across from me, his shirt damp, his hair sticking to his forehead. His smile faded just slightly as he looked at me, his expression shifting into something softer. "See," he murmured. "This is what I like. Like this." I swallowed, my heartbeat suddenly louder in my ears. "I should go change," I said quickly, stepping away before I let myself think too much. But even as I walked away, I could feel his gaze lingering. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure what to do with the way it made me feel. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was just overthinking. But the shift in Ethan's behavior became impossible to ignore. There were moments that felt different, like the way his hand would brush against mine when we walked together. The way his compliments felt a little more thoughtful, a little more personal. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching a movie, I felt his gaze on me. When I turned, he didn't look away. "What?" I asked, feeling suddenly self-conscious. He smiled. "Nothing. Just thinking." "Thinking about what?" He hesitated, then shrugged. "How different things feel lately. How nice it's been spending time like this." I nodded, not trusting myself to say much. "Yeah, it has." His fingers drummed lightly on the couch, like he wanted to say something more but thought better of it. Instead, he just smiled, his voice softer when he spoke again. "I like seeing you happy, Mom." And for some reason, that simple statement made my heart ache in a way I couldn't explain. I couldn't pretend I didn't notice anymore. Something was shifting between us, and I didn't know how to handle it. So, one evening after Richard had gone to bed, I found myself sitting across from Ethan at the kitchen table, my fingers curled around a cup of tea. "We need to talk," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. Ethan tilted his head slightly. "About what?" I sighed. About us." A flicker of something passed through his expression. "What about us?" I hesitated. "You've been acting different." His lips parted slightly, like he was debating how to respond. Finally, he exhaled and leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. "You noticed," he said simply. He nodded. A long silence stretched between us. "I don't know what to do with it," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Ethan studied me for a moment before finally speaking. "Maybe you don't have to do anything," he said. "Maybe we just let it be." His words lingered in the air between us, unspoken yet heavy. I looked down at my tea, my fingers tightening around the mug. I didn't have an answer, because for the first time in my life, I didn't know what I was supposed to do. After that night in the kitchen, something had shifted inside me. I could no longer pretend that everything in my life was fine. For years, I had settled into the routine of my marriage, pushing my own happiness aside for the sake of stability. But Ethan had unknowingly stirred something inside me, a desire to live again. Not just to exist, not just to be someone's wife or mother, but to be me. The next morning, I found myself staring at my reflection in the mirror. I looked different. Not physically, but something in my eyes had changed. There was a lightness there, a curiosity I hadn't seen in years. I wasn't ready to confront Richard yet. I didn't even know if I wanted to. But I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't stay the same. The first change was small. I started taking long walks alone, letting the cool air clear my mind. Then I joined a yoga class, a place where I could focus on nothing but my breath, my body, and the silence inside me. I even started wearing clothes I had pushed to the back of my closet, things I had stopped wearing because Richard never noticed them. And Ethan noticed. "You look different," he said one afternoon as we sat on the balcony, sipping tea. Smiled. "Good different." He nodded, a grin tugging at his lips. "Yeah. You look happy." And for the first time in a long time I was. Richard didn't notice the changes. Or if he did, he didn't care enough to ask. He was still buried in his work, still stuck in the cycle of routine that I had finally started breaking free from. One evening, as I sat across from him at the dinner table, watching him scroll through his phone between bites of food, I felt a strange sense of detachment. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad. I just felt nothing. And that's when I knew. I deserved more than this. That night, as I curled up in bed, I made a decision. I wasn't going to wait for my life to change. I was going to change it myself. A week later I booked a weekend trip. Nothing extravagant, just a small getaway by the beach. "Come with me," I told Ethan, handing him the second ticket. He raised an eyebrow. "Seriously?" "Seriously," I said. "I need this. And I'd love for you to come." Ethan didn't hesitate. "Then let's go." 2 days later, we arrived at a quiet seaside town, where the salty breeze carried away my worries. For the first time in years I felt free. We spent the days walking along the shore, talking about everything and nothing. One evening we sat on the sand, watching the waves roll in under the setting sun. "This suits you," Ethan said, nudging me lightly. "What does?" "This." He gestured around us. "Ooh, being happy. Not thinking about anyone else for once." I exhaled, letting the ocean air fill my lungs. "It feels good." He smiled. "Then don't stop." And I didn't plan to. When we returned home, I knew I couldn't go back to the way things were. I sat down with Richard that night. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady. He barely looked up from his laptop. "About what?" "About us." He sighed, setting his laptop aside. "What about us?" And that's when I realized. He had no idea how unhappy I had been. Because he had never truly seen me. "I'm not happy, Richard," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "And I don't think you are either." For the first time in years, he actually looked at me. Really looked at me. And maybe, just maybe, he saw what I had seen in the mirror that morning. A woman who was finally ready to choose herself. The conversation with Richard was the beginning of the end. We didn't fight. We didn't yell. But for the first time in years we were honest. And honesty left no room for pretending. He admitted that he had felt the distance between us, that he had buried himself in work because he didn't know how to fix things. I admitted that I had been unhappy for a long time, that I had lost myself in the process of trying to be everything for him while receiving nothing in return. By the end of the conversation, we both knew the truth. Our marriage was over. And it wasn't tragic. It was simply time. The next few months were a whirlwind of change. Richard moved out. The house felt emptier without him, but instead of sadness, I felt relief. For the first time in years, I woke up without the weight of a broken marriage pressing down on my chest. I filled my days with things that made me feel alive. I went back to school, enrolling in a few courses just for me. Writing, photography, things I had always loved but never made time for. I started traveling, even if just for short weekend trips. And through it all, Ethan was there. My anchor. My greatest supporter. My son, but also my closest friend. We had always been close, but now our bond felt stronger, more unbreakable. He had seen me at my lowest and helped me find my way back to life. One evening, months after the divorce was finalized, Ethan and I sat on the balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of gold and violet. "You did it," he said, sipping his tea. "Did what?" asked, smiling. "You changed your life. You didn't think you could, but you did." I exhaled, letting the cool evening breeze wrap around me. "Yeah," I admitted. "I did." He turned to me. His expression softer than usual. "Are you happy?" I thought about it for a moment. Really thought about it. "I think so," I said finally. "For the first time in a long time, I really think I am." Ethan grinned. "Good. You deserve it." I placed my hand over his, giving it a small squeeze. "Thank you, Ethan." "For what?" "For reminding me that life is still worth living." He smiled, squeezing my hand in return. "Always." And as we sat there, watching the last light fade into twilight, I knew. This was just the beginning. The breeze was cool against my skin, carrying the scent of the distant rain as we sat side by side on the balcony. The silence between us was comfortable, filled with unspoken words that didn't need to be said. Ethan shifted slightly beside me, his fingers drumming absent-mindedly on the railing. Then, without a word, he turned toward me and wrapped his arms around me in a tight, warm hug. Caught me off guard. Not because Ethan had never hugged me before, but because this one felt different. It wasn't just a casual embrace. It wasn't just a passing gesture. It was comfort. It was gratitude. It was understanding. I felt my body relax against him, my arms circling around his back as I let myself lean into the warmth of the moment. "Mom," he murmured softly, his chin resting lightly against the top of my head. "I just want you to know that I'm proud of you." A lump formed in my throat. I closed my eyes, exhaling a slow breath as I whispered, "That means the world to me, sweetheart." He held me a little tighter for a moment before finally pulling back, his hands lingering on my shoulders. "You're not alone," he said firmly. "You never were." I smiled, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "I know," I said, and in that moment I truly believed it. For the first time in years I felt at peace. I wasn't just a mother. I wasn't just someone's wife. It was me. And I was finally learning to embrace that. Ethan had helped me find my way back to myself, and for that I would always be grateful. As the stars began to dot the night sky, I sat beside him, feeling lighter, freer, whole. And I knew this was only the beginning of a beautiful new chapter.